Coming to you from beautiful Flagstaff, Arizona, this is the Drinking Horn Meadcast. Join us as we take a deeper dive into mead and mead culture. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Drinking Horn Meadcast. I'll tell you what, pretty much every introduction I say we have a special episode. That's just how I feel. But this episode, we have gone international, and that is pretty darn cool. And we have someone who is an expert in his field, the person that comes up as the authority on something that we will talk about, and that is our Mead Hall. We just started opening up here downtown in Flagstaff, our Mead Hall, the Drinking Horn Mead Hall. And so I am super, super excited for this conversation and to learn a ton of stuff about Mead Halls from none other than Steve Pollington, all the way over in England. Welcome, Steve, to the Meadcast. Thank you a million times over for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you, Nick. Great to be here.
Nice. And so I called you an authority, and that is, I think, very much due just in the fact that from what I read, all the Old English history and scripts and books that you've written, and you said you've joined with other people and written a bunch of books as well, but at least a dozen to your own name. So would you say you're pretty well up on Old English history and mead halls?
I think I'm fairly well qualified to talk about it, yeah. I teach Old English as a language. I deal with Anglo-Saxon artifacts from time to time as part of my cataloguing job for an auction house. So yeah, there's not a whole lot I don't know something about, but I'm still learning.
Yeah, we all are, right?
Yeah, right.
And I'm learning so much coming into Drinking Horn, our meadery here, because I come from a beer background, and I knew a little bit about mead, but I didn't know a whole lot. And I'll tell you what, I'm diving in deep now into bees, honey, the Norse mythology, some of the history and stuff like that. So I'm ramped up and amped up to learn more and more about this.
That's so encouraging to hear. That's fantastic.
Nice, good. And being surrounded right here by the Mead Hall, we just opened up. It's only appropriate now to do this here. So we're international. You're over in England, specifically in Colchester, in Essex. And is that kind of like a county?
It's a county, yeah. Used to be a kingdom way back, but it's just a county now.
Oh,
Kingdom
all right.
of the East Saxons, the Erstsaxe. So,
okay.
Yeah, back in the day, we had our own kings. Maybe one day, who knows?
Come back around. Yeah, and that's outside of London a little ways, northeast?
Yeah, it's 60 miles northeast of London, just on the coast. It's the one thing that everybody knows about Essex is it's flat and uninteresting. There's nothing there over 8 foot high. It's really quite geographically dull. But there we are.
Well, but great place to put a couple castles, though, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice. So we're going to talk about Mead Hall. So I guess just to start off, for people who have not yet experienced our Mead Hall or any Mead Hall, in fact, or don't even know what we're possibly talking about, could you give a brief description of what a Mead Hall is, maybe, the word that it comes from and what that word means, and just a little bit. Well, I do want to talk about the architecture and all the different social aspects of it for sure, and dive deep into that. But can you give, what's your elevator speech talk about what a Mead Hall is?
Okay. The Mead Hall is a shorthand way of referring to a feature of early medieval settlements in England, Anglo-Saxon England, but sure as hell in Norway, Denmark, the Baltic generally, and probably in Wales and Ireland as well. These buildings are set in a kind of village setting, so there's a load of agricultural buildings and small houses and so on. But in the centre of the settlement, there's always one much larger, much more firmly rooted building that forms the nucleus of the settlement. And it dominates the buildings around it, and it dominates the countryside around. Because it's the central building and a larger building than the others, it's effectively the seat of power. The average Mead Hall is well, we're going to talk about architecture later, but what you really need to know is that it's where all the good stuff and all the bad stuff happens. It's where uh, guests come and stand before the lord of the settlement and make their greetings or whatever else other stuff they've got to do. It's the place where everything of note, everything of worth happens.
Nice, excellent. I love the description that it's the nucleus of the
Wow, yeah,
settlement. That
yeah.
that brings it all together, and it's hilarious that you say it's where the good stuff happens. And I thought that was going to be the end of the sentence, but you're like,
Uh-uh.
and it's where the bad stuff happens as
Oh yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we can go ahead and talk about the structure of it. You said it's much larger than most or all of the other buildings that were in those settlements, but there's something specific about its build out and its shape. So can you let us in on that?
Yeah, generally speaking, in England, these buildings have they're basically rectangular. So they have two long sides and two short sides. There are doors in the long sides that are opened for agricultural purposes, shall we say, winnowing and that kind of thing. But the doors in the short side are for coming in and going out on formal occasions. And usually, oh, sorry, there's something here. There's a horse going past. Who knew?
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome. How
it's
fitting.
well, it's unusual, but anything can happen in Essex.
That's so cool. The
Sorry
horse,
about that.
part of the agriculture. No, it's coming in the long side, right? You said.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so as you as a guest or a visitor to the hall, as you approach it, it's this big, imposing structure, probably two, three times the size of any of the houses in the settlement in terms of its height. And as you approach it, you enter via a big, impressive main door. You go into an antechamber, and that's where you take off your outer clothes. Maybe you hand over your weapon because you don't want to be going in fully armed. That's probably a bad idea. And it's also where you're greeted by the lady of the hall or one of her maidens who help you to get off your traveling cloak, give you a bowl of warm water to wash the dust of your travels off yourself, and a towel to dry, so that you're fresh and rested when you enter the main hall. And then as you go in, obviously, it's much darker in there than it has been outside, but it's lit by a central hearth, a central fireplace, that with a fire running probably a third of the length of the building, and these things could be 60, 80 feet long, quite routinely. So there's a bit of a blaze going on in there, and at the far end, on a dais raised up so that he can see everyone, is the lord of the settlement on his high seat, able to kind of dominate the surroundings. Nothing happens in that space that he doesn't know about. Mm.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know about you called it an what was the kind
An
of mudroom?
antechamber, yeah,
Antechamber, yeah.
yeah,
And then much like we have nowadays, still we have a hostess, at restaurants that helps the
yeah,
people
exactly,
out. So they
yeah.
kind of had this maiden, or you said sometimes it was like the lady of the house?
Yeah, if you were important enough, it would be the lady of the settlement would come and deal with you personally. But for the plebs and for the travellers and the merchants and the singers of songs and tellers of tales, this would be somebody a little lower down the rank.
And this fire, this hearth that you're talking about, you said it runs a third of the building, and I'm
That's
imagining that
yeah.
what a
Imagine
what a sight.
yeah, exactly, a blazing fire. Um, I've been to a recreated hall just outside Canterbury in Kent, um, accurate dimensions wise. And the really strange thing is that with that fire going, you can stand 6 feet from it, and it's way too hot, and you're kind of getting quite uncomfortable. You move back a foot, and it's freezing cold on a winter's day. So the sweet spot is, this kind of 6'6" from the fire. You don't stray from that. That's the good seat.
Wow, that's crazy. That sounds a lot like like camping, sometimes everyone's always kind of fidgeting a little bit closer, a little further away, a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah,
closer.
yeah. You can't just kind of dial up the heat, so you just have to move a little closer to the source of heat. Yeah,
Yeah. And that kind of brings people together as well, probably because you can't spread out as much, so you probably get a lot more cozy with your neighbor
yeah,
in
exactly.
the
Yeah,
winter time at least. So were
yeah.
these fires going year round?
They were probably never allowed to go completely out because once the
Oh,
fire goes out, that they have a sort of symbolic quality. The
mm,
hearth is the center of the home, so if the fire goes out, that's it kind of suggests that the game's over. That
really?
yeah,
Okay, way more than just heating the place. That symbol.
exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah.
building codes and probably county codes and health codes don't allow us to have a giant fire in the middle of the place, but we do have one going right now, a fake fire going.
Oh, right.
We did a build out of a fireplace with a TV set in it, and we always have like a fire going. So
Brilliant.
um,
Yeah.
it's at least representing that right
Exactly. It's
there.
a nod to the past, isn't it? And that's fine. That's great.
Yeah, yep. And I tell you what, we'd probably get in a lot more trouble these days if someone fell into a fire than they did back in the day. They probably just called them an idiot and kicked them out. Here, we'd probably
Yeah.
have to deal
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
some legal things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the another thing you talked about was the head of the settlement being literally physically raised up above
Yeah.
everything to oversee it. Is that something that was found in all of these structures for some reason? You just kept seeing that, or was that mostly from
Well,
literature
there are
that you?
usually on the better preserved ones because by and large all we have in England is holes in the ground, just post holes.
Oh, hmm.
In Scandinavia, these things are a bit more solidly built because they have a whole lot of rocks and other building materials to hand. But
Hmm.
certainly in Eastern England, it's all clay and sand. You can't do an awful lot with that. So what we have to base our assumptions on is the post holes, the holes where substantial posts have been driven into the ground, and then as these rot away, you can just get a soil stain. The soil is a slightly different colour, and if you're a trained archaeologist, you can make assumptions, make deductions based on this.
Hmm.
Usually, there are four large posts driven into the earth, and these support a dais, a kind of raised platform, and on the platform sits the main chair, what they call the gifstol, the gift stool, which is where the Lord sits. It's where gifts, rewards, judgments are handed out. It's the kind of the, the other than the hearth, it's the focus of the whole settlement, the single place to be.
Nice. And it's the place to be. It's the place to be for the settlement. And I just started in on. I received your book, Mead
Oh, well
Hall,
done.
and I sat down with a draft, as you call it, and started in on it. And I had three friends come up to me and totally distracted me.
Of
Um,
course, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but the introduction told quite a bit, so I can't wait to dive deeper into it. But in
Mhm.
that introduction, you talk about the two separate, kind of almost two main focuses of the Mead Hall.
Yeah,
Something about a symbol, and then something more about kind of party style. And I know there's
yeah.
actual names for that. So can you speak to those two differences in the focus of the Mead Hall?
Sure. Um, One of the things you have to understand about a mead hall is that we don't have a single building in the modern world that corresponds. The mead hall is, because it's the centre of the settlement, it's the court. It's where legal judgments are given. It's where petitions are raised and brought up for judgment. It's where entertainment takes place. It's where people get together in the evening and have a bit of a chat and exchange news and play games and all the other fun stuff. So it's a village hall in our terms. It's a courthouse, and to some extent, it's also a church. Um, the two types of feasting, we don't have quite the same. We don't have the exact words in modern English to express this, but feasting is one way of dealing with it. The Sumbel which is a kind of a very formal, in some senses, a religious occasion. It's like a celebration of the community. It's where the whole of the people who live around about and look to that leader, that lord, for their as their protector. They all come together and they have a formal occasion where maybe there's something to celebrate. Maybe they've got an agricultural surplus and they're going to thank the powers, the supernatural powers, for having provided this. And at the Sumbel, very formal rites, rituals take place. There is a procession. There's ritual cleaning and kind of preparation of everything in order to have everything exactly right for when these ceremonies take place. There are rules as to who gets served in which order. If you're the head man, the lord, then you are served first, and then those one kind of rung down on the social ladder get served next, and so on and so on and so on until the lowest orders, the youths, the people who haven't proved themselves, get served basically last. And that is the formal occasion, the Sumbel. Other than that, we do know that they had a less formal kind of way of handing out drink, which is called a Geberschipper, a sharing of beer. And with a Geberschipper, it's much more about fun and games. It's songs, it's entertainment, it's music, it's dance, it's all that fun stuff that you might get in a bar or an English pub today. It's all the informal stuff, exchanging gossip and telling news, greeting travellers who've come from afar and trying to get stories out of them of what things that they've seen and done. And the Geberschipper, there's one famous incident that I can't let you go without retelling for you. It occurs in the story of King Oswald of Northumbria, who meets a sticky end, and a chap is sent to recover his physical remains. And he on his return journey to Northumbria, which is way up north, several days' ride, he comes one evening to a settlement where they're having a Geberschipper, a beer sharing. And he's in a thatched hall. He comes in, he hangs his coat and bag and appurtenances up and sits down for an evening's drinking. And of course, you've got a wooden hall plus fire plus alcoholic drink. So what could possibly go wrong? A spark from the fire shoots up into the thatched roof, sets the whole thing alight, and it all burns to the ground. Except for the one little frame where the man had hung up his bag, because that's where the holy relics of St. Oswald had been placed, and therefore that was protected. So wow. Yeah, believe that if you will. But yeah, it at least shows that they had these informal fun occasions that weren't formal at all.
Yeah. Well, I will believe it for sure, absolutely, because that's an awesome story there. Yeah. So this man, and I was actually trying to look up how to pronounce that, but Geberschipper.
Geberschipper, yeah.
Geberschipper. Yeah. That beer party was really intriguing to me, that it was kind of that separation and such a formal and informal thing. Was it something that the Mead Halls would kind of have problems with those overlapping ever, or were there like set times? I'm imagining like happy hour, was the people would know that, this is the time for this and that's the time for that.
Well, I think the Sumbel, the formal occasion would be, high days and holidays. It's going to be midwinter. It's going to be maybe midsummer. And maybe those occasions when taxes are due. Because, this is always you don't get to be head man without collecting cash, or food or whatever else is their currency. So yeah, it will be those occasions when everybody's got to come together for a reason, and the reason may not be fun. It may be handing over money.
Yeah. Sometimes I got to go to City Hall and pay a parking ticket,
There
stuff
you
like
go.
that. So yeah. And kind of backtracking just a little bit, when I was reading through the introduction and a little bit of the beginning, and even on the cover, the title, Mead Hall, I saw 3 different ways of saying it, either all one word, a hyphenated word, or separated words. Is there certain times to use those certain things, or is it just kind of like a free-for-all?
Well, they're overlapping terms, as you say. The one of the One of the things is Old English verse uses an awful lot of synonyms, a lot of similar words for to say the same thing, and that's because they don't use rhyme exactly, but for metrical reasons they need to have
Oh,
different ways of saying. So you have meduseld, mead, which is Mead Hall, but you can have a bear cellar, or it can be a salor or a reched. There are other ways of saying exactly the same thing, and the word for strong drink can be beor, which is our word beer, erlu, which is ale, ween, I can't think what that might be, and and merdu, mead. So these are the 4 main alcoholic drinks that they know. The difference between beer and ale at this time is probably not anything to do with the brewing process or adding hops or any of that stuff that we now have as the difference between them. I think essentially beer, is the mundane substance. It's what you're actually dealing with. Whereas when you have ale, that's actually a kind of socially significant, almost magically charged liquid, and it has these transformative effects on men, on human beings. It can turn people who are quite shy into people who are very loquacious and vivacious. It can turn people who are quite calm and cheerful into roaring drunks who are spoiling for a fight. So they understood the transformative effects of alcohol, and this formal setting was one way to kind of harness that energy in a safe way. Keep it very formal, keep it very strictly controlled, and there'll be much fewer problems. And of course, once you've got alcoholic intake, and you start to get you start not to be fully in control of your faculties, shall we say. At that point, there is, in heathen times, in pre-Christian times, there was a definite understanding that the transformation in your mental state was because you were in touch with the gods.
Oh,
this was your pathway to channeling the gods and conversing with them, taking messages from them. That was definitely part of what they were. So as much as a drinks party is fun, on those special ritual occasions, it was serious stuff.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't necessarily like an excuse. The guy was getting, hammered on the side, and he's like, "I'm just talking to the gods," kind of thing. But in the formal sense, they would use drink.
You could try that, but I don't know that it would wash.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for some of our customers here at the Mead Hall using that excuse.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That's really cool to know that it was not just a drink to hang out with people. It was actually used for a purpose to it inhibits the brain or opens it up, different types of ways, and you can start to reveal not only yourself but possibly some other messages, like you said, coming. That's really cool. That's interesting.
Puts you in touch with the ancestors. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, and I like the differences between the beer and the ale. I'm going to start doing that a lot. When I'm talking about just the product, I'll say beer, but when I'm sitting down with a friend or with someone and it transforms into that thing, then it's an ale. I like that.
Yeah.
Although being a brewer, I'll probably get some slack if I'm drinking a lager and I call it an ale. Then they'll probably look at me a little funny. But Now, hopping back over to the mead, was
Hmm.
this? It was called a. Can you pronounce that again? The Medosald.
Meduseld.
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 Yeah. So that was one question that our Viking here, Hallbjorn, had was that the overlying name for these
It's one of the
structures?
names, but there are plenty of others. Yeah.
Cool. He's asking me a question right now. What's that?
Like why they didn't use like the word hall like they did with the word Valhalla, like meet the hall of the slain. Like
Oh,
why
okay.
say it instead of hall?
So another part of his question was that why didn't they use like hall like they would with Valhalla? What was the purpose of that second part of the word?
I don't think there's any real difference.
Oh, okay.
It's poetry and the way that poets work and think, and it's you know what poets are like.
Yeah, I know what artists are like and poets. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was just kind of a poetry thing. Just it means the same thing, but it's a different way of saying it.
Yeah.
And you, Steve, you said that having different words for the same thing allowed them to speak in that kind of poetry, in that verse.
Yes.
And that's so cool to me that if you want to say something, you have a couple options to make it sound better and flow better.
Yeah.
That's so rad. That's so cool.
The differences in meaning are probably not something that we can recover. Sorry.
Yeah, no, he was asking too, and I have my headphones on, so I couldn't
Yeah.
get both things. You had another question?
No, another question. One of my favorite examples of that is in they have a kenning for sea that says whale road instead of just sea, and it flows better with poetry.
Yeah, Whale Road. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, the flow. It's all about the flow. Speaking of the flow,
Hmm.
well, no, actually, we talked about the architecture, but the one of the main focuses that I think you talk about in your book is the feasting.
Yeah.
Is there more to dive into that we haven't discussed about the feast that would happen here?
Well, I think the modern word feast has all kinds of associations, but what we're talking about here really is management of food resources. So having a feast for the community, the people who've toiled in the fields and brought the food in, is one thing. The women of the settlement were most definitely connected with the processing of food and the serving of it. The men more with the gathering of it, with the hunting and the sort of toil in the fields and so on. And that does seem to be one of the divisions of labour. But the purpose of having a lord, a hlavord, the word lord is the Old English word hlavord, which is hlaf word, loaf warder, loaf keeper, the man who's in charge of making sure there's enough food.
Huh.
It's not just about producing surpluses. It's in when you've got it, don't waste it. Eat it, yourselves, share it out amongst yourselves, but spend it wisely. Get the people from the next settlement over. Get on good terms with them. Host them. Give them a good time because you don't know when you're going to need their help. If your crops fail next year, you may be having to go to them cap in hand to get some help to get them to share their food. If everybody does this thing, then it works for everybody. But it's that kind of management of resources. It's about husbandry, but it's about good relations as well. An Anglo-Saxon king often had a number of large mead halls of his own, but he didn't have a kind of central palace in the way that we have in London or Washington or whatever today. A king would go out on a specified journey called by the Latin term iter, journey. And he would go from one major settlement, one town, to the next, to the next, to the next on a particular route. And he would stay overnight for 1, 2 nights with all the leading men, all the important people. He would make sure that he turned up at their hall. And at that, they all then had the opportunity to see the king and feel good about all that kind of stuff. It gave him the opportunity to, get buddy with the people that he relied on for support. And in that way, the community's resources could be spent to elevate them socially and give them a better integration into the wider community. And it worked. This system worked.
Nice. I love the idea of going through and the traveling representation, and that makes me think of opportunities we can have even here in this Mead Hall to have, maybe it's not, like the mayor or something coming by, maybe it is, but,
Well, maybe.
heads of community, and we've got a university here, so big things come up. I'd love to see this Mead Hall not only provide drink, but provide that, what you're saying, like people to
Yeah.
come in and get in touch with the community and get in touch with the people. And so that just put that in my mind when I'm looking around here. That's great.
It's a great opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like you said, the nucleus, that's where the good stuff happens. And I'm sure some of those meetings didn't go great and the king
Oh,
was
exactly. Yeah.
left out the back door or something like that.
Yeah. And if you'd been caught having committed a crime, you'd be hauled up in front of the head man, the Lord, and you could be. It's not just punishment, a fine or whatever. It's you could be killed.
Yeah.
Corporal punishment.
Hopefully nothing like that'll happen here.
Yeah. Sure, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's so we're again speaking with Steve Pollington, who is over in Essex, England, and is the author of many books, a dozen or more about Old English history. He's or the Old English language. He's an instructor on that, and all things pretty much Mead Hall. He wrote what I have found to be the book on Mead Halls.
Kind of you to say so.
It's what's out there. It's what I found. So it's got to be true.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of dive into a little bit. We had discussed a little bit before coming on here about what happened with the decline of this culture or this institution. Yeah, it's a good word for it. So if there's anything that led up to that, that instead of jumping right to that, I'd like to talk about that.
Well, we've kind of touched on the fact that the Mead Hall, in its heyday in the 7th century, maybe, just as kings and kingship are getting going in England. England in those days is not a country; it's a number of smaller kingdoms, like Essex is one, Sussex and Kent and Northumbria and so on. These were fairly small scale, even by English standards, which are nothing like yours. Everything's bigger in Texas,
That's right.
Yeah. But the Mead Hall kind of it was the religious centre in the pre-Christian period. It was the judgment centre, the courthouse. It was to some extent the place where punishments took place. It was the centre of entertainment. It was the centre of worship. It was, up to a point, a defensible structure in a settlement that generally wasn't defended. Villages didn't have anything much more than a fence around them in those days. So it had all these functions in one building. It was also where travelling merchants or craftsmen would come before the Lord and try and strike a deal with him, try and sell their wares, try to if there were travelling singers or musicians or storytellers, that's where they would set up and give their performances. And basically, from the later 7th century onwards, and certainly by the end of the 8th century, so this is 1,200 years ago, give or take, all these functions kind of fell away. With Christianity, heathen celebration of heathen gods and so on was no longer considered appropriate. So the Mead Hall lost its religious dimension. It was no longer the place where worship took place. That now took place in churches, in minsters, and the religious specialists no longer lived within the community to celebrate in the Mead Hall. They were living now in convents and monasteries. With the monetization of the economy in the 9th century, things got a whole lot more organized. Taxation, come on, it's unavoidable. But that led to it was no longer simply enough for a merchant to pitch up and sort of spread his wares out for sale, as he had done in the old days, and just have a few kind of random witnesses who happened to be lounging around in the hall at that time. If you wanted to strike a deal by the 9th century, you had to do that in a fortified settlement called a burg. It's the word that we have over here, borough, and you have place names based on borough. So a borough is a fortified place. It's a defensible settlement, and this is because of the wars with the Danes. It was becoming impossible to defend all the tiny settlements. So they hit on the idea of having these sort of big, stable, fortified centres, which were like medieval castles. You know, you had a garrison in there that were a permanent militarised force who were able to impose the king's will on the countryside and protect against the Danes and do all that other stuff. And these places took on a vast economic importance because it became no longer possible to have random deals struck out in the settlements. Deals had to be witnessed by the reeve, and the reeve lived in the burg, so you had to go to the burg. The reeve is, of course, the king's representative, and if you are the representative of a whole shire, you're the shire reeve, the sheriff. That's where the word comes from. Yeah. So you're the king's man on the spot, and it's, you know, you have the king's authority. So any deal has to be witnessed by you. When people need to pay their taxes, they have to bring their money, their coins, because there's no paper money or banknotes or any of that kind of stuff. It's silver coins. They bring their coins to the burg. They hand over 240 silver pennies, which should be £1 weight, and those are the old coins. But they're no longer, you can't spend them anymore. They're no longer monetized. So you hand them over and you get the new ones, but you don't get 240 back, you get 220, because the king's keeping 10 and the guy who's making the coins is keeping 10. So, and all this has to happen in the burg, in this fortified settlement. The burg then becomes not only where the king's taxation takes place, but it's also where trials take place, where justice is seen to be carried out, fines are paid out. So the whole thing kind of collapses, really, so that the Mead Hall becomes reduced in status. It's not that it fades away completely, but it becomes really just a site for local entertainments. Maybe they're celebrating marriages there, maybe they're getting together for a few drinks, they're singing songs, they're doing the minor local stuff, but it no longer has that central importance. But having said that, although that's these kind of hard economic historical fact, the Mead Hall never lost its importance in men's hearts, the mental picture that the Anglo-Saxons had of their world was very much of the Mead Hall as the great good place where all the fun stuff happens. It's the only place where you can be sure that the guy sitting next to you on the bench is your friend and neighbour, and not some random stranger who's going to wait for you outside and turn you over, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I think I have visited the States occasionally, and I'm very much struck by the central place that cowboys and the West have in your culture, in the imagined culture, the imagination of America today. But they're not economically important anymore. It's just they're part of who you are. And I think the Mead Hall met its end really in exactly the same way. Part of the mental furniture that you need, but actually no longer an economic necessity.
That's a really cool to go through the process of how things became more structured and how that went away. But yeah, it is you bringing up, you know, the thought of cowboys in that culture. It is romanticized, and we are, you know, a little bit ingrained it's ingrained within us, the thought, and we can all go back to them sitting around a fire, again, being a central thing with the horses around them. And so, to keep that as part of your, your past and like I said,
your tradition, isn't it? It's what makes
tradition.
You who you are.
I could have easily stopped mumbling if I just remember the word tradition. Yeah. So was that something that people were fighting against, that separate? Oops, hit my mic. Let me start that over. Was that something that people were fighting against, to separate that kind of thing and kind of dissolve the Mead Hall? Were people still struggling to saying like, no, we don't want these boroughs that are taking away part of our culture?
I think in the end, necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? It was impossible for the king to guarantee people's safety without having places from which military strikes could be launched, or which could be a place of refuge when things turned ugly. So as much as they may have regretted it, in the end, facts are facts.
Gotcha. I forgot you did mention that was the main reason of the dissolving of it, was the ability to protect against you said the Danes? Is that
Yeah.
Okay. So as we try to recreate that here in a pretty random place, Flagstaff, Arizona, but we try to recreate that kind of feel. What would you love to see as you walked into a modern Mead Hall? What are you imagining that would help bring in that feel? If you can give us any of those suggestions.
Well,
besides a fire right in the middle.
Yeah, you need a fire, obviously. You need. I'm an old man and I shouldn't say this, but you need serving wenches, because really, it's no good without serving wenches.
Gotcha.
You need good quality products. If it's mead, then get good mead. If it's beer, then get the good stuff, because it's got to be a place that is important to the people who support it. And if I were walking through the door of your Mead Hall, I'd like to see a foaming glass of something strong and tasty, and a bench to sit on, and some good company, and some music, and some laughter.
Nice.
What else do you need?
No, right. Nothing else. Something nice, cold and large, and then we've got our long table, and man, I really expect a whole lot of laughter and great community in here.
Sincerely hope it happens.
Yeah, I think it will. The owners here, Evan and Kelly, did such a great job with the build out, and then we're already having people. Of course, it's a lot different. We were opening in the middle of a pandemic, and so it's a very slow opening. But the people that are coming in here are really, I think, gaining that feel. And so, thanks for the suggestions there. And we've got the long table. We've got, I think, the community feel, and having, like I said, events and stuff like that, just trying to kind of bring that back to being a community space. I talk about what I call the third space. So there's home, there's work, and then there's the third space. And to me, that's what the pubs and what the breweries and what this Mead Hall is going to be. It's going to be that third spot where you can come together, share stories, create new stories, and just enjoy each other.
And celebrate the important things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I think that's something actually. Yeah, that's something great to always have in the back of the mind, to make it a place of celebration.
Absolutely. You can wish for nothing better than that.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Good deal. Well, what else can we learn from you about these Mead Halls and the culture? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I can give you a little taste of the kind of verse, the kind of poetry that would have been going on, being declaimed across the fire there. I won't do the whole thing, but there's a little extract from Beowulf, which deals with the feasting in the great hall of the king Hrothgar, his hall was called Heorot, which means a hart or a stag, because he had a stag's horns above the door. Well, why wouldn't you, Það var sån salum sinches bryta, gammal fäxon Guthrof, Jaukelje livde brech och bert denna. Je hyrde on Beowulve folkes hyrde, fast rädne je socht. Thar was halad a chlechtor, llun hwinsode, ward waron winsuma. Ewd a welch theo. I'll do that a bit again. Ewd a welch theo ffordd, Quain Rothgaris, Cuna Yamundi, Grete Goldrodden Gumman on Herle, on the Freulich Wif Fulje Selde, Aris erst dena Erdel Werde, Bad hinne blizne et Tarebertheche, Leudum Leofne, he on Lustje Thech. Then it was a happy time for the dealer of rings, the hoary-headed and battled fierce. He trusted that help the bright Dane's champion. He heard of Beowulf's steadfast resolve, the people's watchman. There was warriors' laughter, the mirth resounded, words were joyful. Welchtheo went forth, Hrothgar's queen. Mindful of good customs, gold adorned, she greeted the man in the hall, and then the noble woman handed a cup first to the East Dane's noble keeper, bade him be merry at the beer drinking, dear to his folk. He willingly partook. Just a little taste.
Oh, that was so cool. That's awesome.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, that's something I want to listen to a couple times, and I think everybody out there definitely enjoyed hearing that straight from the mouth of someone who's an expert and studies it. So that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Steve Pollington over there in England, writer of several or a dozen or more books on Old English and Anglo-Saxon history, and especially the one that I am going to dive into the next, I don't know, it'll probably take me a little less than a week to cruise through this guy. Although I did see there's quite a bit of stuff that I don't even know what it is. There's some obviously some verse that I'll have to just kind of say, oh, that looks cool, but I have no idea what that's saying.
yeah. I do that all the time.
Yeah. But thank you once again. This was absolutely an honor to have you come and tell us a lot more about Mead Halls and their history. And so I can share that understanding with not only the employees here, but also the customers, so we can all just do the Mead Hall justice and respect it and do it right and create a culture here that's meant to be.
I wish you every success with it. I really hope that it comes up for you. It's such a valuable and important thing.
Yeah, agreed. And if you find yourself ever coming to visit, say, Grand Canyon, and you're in the Arizona area, obviously let us know.
Happen.
Yeah,
I'll bring my 7th century gear with me and liven things up.
But like the Mead Hall, we will have you check all the weapons at the door.
Absolutely.
Good deal. Well, thanks again, Steve. I really appreciate it, and hope you have an amazing rest of your evening and year and all that such.
Sure. My pleasure.
All right. Thanks again one more time to Steve Pollington, coming to us all the way from over in Essex, England. That's right, Drinking Horn Meadcast is international. Hope you guys learned a little bit about Mead Halls, or maybe you learned a lot about Mead Halls. I know I did, and I have a feeling I'd like to have him on again to dive deeper into some of those things. But if you did enjoy this, or you have any comments or thoughts, then leave them, I don't know, wherever, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you get this podcast. Write us a letter on actual paper and send it to us. Drop by the Mead Hall and let us know, downtown Flagstaff. But and even better, it would be great if you guys could go onto Apple Podcasts and give us a review and a rating, just so we can get out there to more people who are searching for mead or meadery or Vikings or bees or all these great things I think we're discussing. So just a simple review and a simple 5 stars really goes a long way, I think, in getting the word out there for Drinking Horn Meadcast. I'm Nick Irvin, one of your hosts, and that's about it for this episode. Hope you guys have a glorious rest of your day, week, month, year, and hell, lifetime. Live simply, drink simply. Drinking Horn Mead.